In 1994, a British rock star made a chilling promise. He told a documentary crew he wanted Phil Collins' head in his fridge by the end of the decade. He wasn't joking. He called Phil the Antichrist of music, but he wasn't alone. A grunge icon said he'd only wear tie-dye if it was dyed with Phil's urine. A reality TV judge got called cruel by Phil. Even his childhood hero humiliated him in public. The man who sold 150 million albums somehow became the most hated musician alive. Phil Collins was born on January 30th, 1951, in Chiswick, West London. His mother, June, worked as a theatrical agent. His father, Greville, was an insurance man. That mix of creativity and structure shaped Phil from the start. His mom's job meant showbiz talk was normal at home. Actors, stage schedules, and performances were part of the dinner conversation. He grew up hearing how the business worked behind the scenes, how to handle agents, how to spot a good deal, how to manage a crowd. Without knowing it, Phil was getting a backstage education and entertainment before he could even write a full sentence. Then, at just 5 years old, something clicked. He got a toy drum kit, and it lit a fire in him. This wasn't just a kid banging on plastic. Phil had a gift. That same year, on a family holiday at Butlins, he entered a talent contest. The orchestra began to play behind him, but they were in the wrong key. Little Phil stopped them cold. He told the musicians they were off, and he was right. A 5-year-old correcting trained adults. The audience couldn't believe it, but it showed something important. Phil didn't just hear music, he understood it. His pitch, timing, and guts stood out. And from that day on, no one around him saw him the same way again. By his early teens, Phil was already performing in front of big crowds. He played the Artful Dodger in the London stage production of Oliver, a tough role that needed both charm and swagger. He also showed up as an extra in the Beatles' A Hard Day's Night in 1964. Later, he filmed scenes for Chitty Chitty Bang Bang, but they got cut. That was his first taste of how brutal the entertainment world could be. Even if you did everything right, your work could still be left on the cutting room floor. During school, Phil wasn't just acting. He was also forming bands. His first serious group was called The Real Thing. The name said it all. They weren't playing around. With another early band, Freehold, he wrote his first song, Lying, Crying, Dying. The title was dramatic, but the emotions were real. It showed he wasn't just a drummer or actor. He had stories to tell, and music was the way he told them. This was the beginning of Phil Collins, the songwriter, the frontman, the artist. Then came the moment that changed everything. On June 28, 1970, Phil was flipping through Melody Maker magazine at a friend's house when he spotted a classified ad. It said a band was looking for a drummer, sensitive to acoustic music, and 12-string guitar. That band was Genesis. Phil was only 19. He showed up at Peter Gabriel's parents' house in Surrey for the audition. It lasted 6 hours. He played, sang backing vocals, and just clicked with the group. They hired him for $10 a week. That wasn't enough to live on, so he kept his job at a music shop for a while. But he was in, and Genesis was never the same again. Between 1971 and 1973, Phil helped create 3 albums that defined Genesis' prog rock era. Nursery Crime came first, in October 1971. His drumming on the musical box, a 23-minute track, became iconic. Then came Foxtrot in 1972, where he played on Supper's Ready, a song many fans call the greatest in the genre. It ran for over 20 minutes and changed time signatures constantly, 4, 4, 7, 8, even 9 to 8. And Phil held it all together. In 1973, Selling England by the Pound hit number 3 on the UK charts. On the Battle of Epping Forest, he used 47 percussion instruments, timpani, vibraphone, even kitchen utensils. By this point, he wasn't just a drummer, he was a genius with sticks. But in August 1975, Genesis hit a wall, Peter Gabriel left. No one knew if the band could survive. They launched a massive audition process to find a new singer. 400 people came and went. Each one had to sing 3 complex Genesis tracks. They brought in names like Mick Strickland and Fish from Marillion. But the answer was sitting behind the drums the whole time. Phil had sung back up for years, and when he stepped forward to try lead vocals, something clicked again. On February 3, 1976, he auditioned for real. 4 hours later, it was done. His version of In the Cage gave the band chills. The truth? They had wanted him since week 3, but kept looking just to be sure. What most people didn't know was that during all this, Phil was living a second life. He joined Brand X, a jazz fusion band, in 1975, while recording Wind and Weathering with Genesis by day. He'd rehearse or play with Brand X by night. Sometimes he worked 18 hours straight, drumming until his body gave out. Their first album, Unorthodox Behavior, in 1976, had time signatures like 1716 and 238. His solo on Why Should I Lend You Mine in 1977 ran 12 minutes and left musicians stunned. It was one of the hardest drum pieces in jazz fusion history. Phil Collins didn't plan to become one of the biggest stars of the 1980s. It started with heartbreak. In early 1979, his marriage to Andrea Bertarelli collapsed. He came back to his empty home in Surrey, England, alone, angry and confused. Instead of falling apart, he turned pain into music. He dragged an 1820s piano into the bedroom and added a drum machine. There was no band, no distractions. Just Phil, working through the wreckage of his life. By February 13, 1981, just one day before Valentine's Day, he released Face Value, his first solo album. It wasn't polished, it wasn't sweet, it was raw, real, and full of emotion. The song In the Air Tonight hit listeners like a punch in the chest. By August, it peaked at No. 19 on the Billboard Hot 100. While Diana Ross and Lionel Richie's Endless Love sat at No. 1, that contrast said everything. While the world celebrated romance, Collins tore it down with thunderous drums and haunting silence. Those drums weren't normal. In fact, they were an accident. The sound came from a studio in Shepherd's Bush, where Collins was recording with Peter Gabriel. The producer, Hugh Pagam, accidentally left a microphone on, a mic that was only meant for talking. But what came out of it was magic. The mic was compressed and gated, cutting off the echo and turning each drum hit into something explosive. No one had ever heard drums like that before. They used the effect on In the Air Tonight, and the world took notice. That sound, called gated reverb, became the signature of 1980s pop and rock. Collins used it again in Against All Odds and I Don't Care Anymore. Genesis used it in Mama. Soon, everyone copied it, until the 90s came along and bands wanted something more natural again. But even today, artists like Beyoncé and Lorde bring that sound back, showing just how far Collins's mistake went, and he didn't stop there. In 1982, he released Hello, I Must Be Going, an album filled with soul, rhythm, and heart. It reached number 2 in the UK and there 8 in the US. His cover of You Can't Hurry Love hit number 1 in Britain. Then came No Jacket Required in 1985, and that changed everything. This time, Collins ditched the heartbreak themes. He wanted something upbeat. He brought in Sting and Peter Gabriel for backing vocals and leaned into dance tracks. The album topped charts for 5 weeks in the UK and 7 weeks in the US. It sold over 12 million copies in America and won 3 Grammy Awards, including Album of the Year. That year alone, Collins had 3 #1 hits in the US, more than anyone else in 1985. Between 1984 and 1990, he was unstoppable. He scored 13 top 10 hits in the US. Against All Odds gave him his first solo #1 in America. The song won him a Grammy, but the Oscars snubbed him. He flew to Los Angeles ready to perform, but they chose a dancer instead. Collins never forgot. He joked about it on stage for years. By 1977, with the release of And Then There Were Three, something had changed. Follow You, Follow Me broke into the UK Top 10 in US Top 40. It was catchy, it was soft, it was pop. For die-hard Genesis fans, it was a betrayal. These were the same people who'd memorized 10-minute songs about mythical beasts and dying kings. Now they were getting love songs, simple ones. That sting didn't go away. Genesis had always been a guy band, complicated, male-heavy, and proudly uncommercial. Under Collins, that changed. Their new sound brought in a wider audience, especially women. The band was growing in popularity, but to early fans, it felt like they were losing their soul. Then came Invisible Touch in 1986. It was a full-blown pop record, and it exploded. The title track hit #1 on the U.S. Billboard Hot 100. Genesis had never done that before. The album sold over 6 million copies in the U.S. alone, another 1.2 million in the U.K. 5 singles from that album hit the top 5 in America. 5, Land of Confusion, Throwing It All Away, In Too Deep. Tonight, 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 all chart monsters. Collins later admitted the title song was inspired by Sheila E.'s The Glamorous Life. He wanted to write his own version. Funny enough, the track came from a jam session, just the band messing around. That song became Collins' personal favorite. Mike Rutherford called it a wonderful song, fun to play. The fans were split, but the numbers didn't lie. On July 19, 1986, Invisible Touch sat at #1. Right behind it at #2, Peter Gabriel's Sledgehammer. One band, 2 front men, back-to-back on the charts. It felt like the past and present of Genesis were battling it out. The past didn't win, but success comes at a price. By the mid-'80s, Phil Collins had become bigger than Genesis. His solo debut, Face Value, topped the UK charts for 3 weeks and hit #7 in the US. In the Air Tonight became a worldwide hit. That eerie drum break? Iconic. Then came more albums. Hello, I Must Be Going. No Jacket Required. But seriously, all multi-platinum, No Jacket Required had 4 top 10 hits, including 2 #1s. He wasn't just doing well, he was dominating. By the end of the decade, Collins had more top 40 singles in the U.S. than anyone else. When Genesis came back together in late 1985 to make Invisible Touch, Collins had to assure the others he wasn't quitting. "I'm happy with what we're doing now," he said, but everyone knew it couldn't last forever. In 1996, Collins finally left. Mike Rutherford later admitted the surprise was that he stayed as long as he did. Not everyone loved the success. In fact, a lot of people hated it. Collins became the poster boy for selling out. He didn't just cross over into the mainstream, he took over it. People started getting tired of him. By 2010, he admitted, "I'm sorry that it was all so successful. I honestly didn't mean it to happen like that." The hate wasn't subtle either. In American Psycho, Patrick Bateman rants about Phil Collins before killing someone. The message was clear. Collins had become a symbol of everything people hated about 80s pop. Even South Park joined in, mocking him as a washed-up star, only enjoyable if you were on medication. Phil Collins grew up idolizing the Beatles. So when he finally met Paul McCartney at Buckingham Palace in 2002, he brought along something special, a first edition of the Beatles biography, hoping for a signature. But instead of warmth, McCartney smirked and said to his wife, "Oh, Heather, our little Phil's a bit of a Beatles fan." That one sentence hit like a slap. Collins was stunned. It didn't feel like a joke. It felt like he was being mocked for simply admiring someone he grew up listening to. Years later, he admitted he never forgot that moment. In his words, you fuck, it festered. Collins later said, McCartney had a superiority complex. When McCartney eventually reached out, It wasn't really an apology. Collins said it felt more like, "Let's move on." But for him, that comment had lingered far too long. He wasn't just bitter, he was hurt. And when you're in a business where ego is currency, even a small dig can grow into a years-long feud. Simon Cowell didn't get off easy either. In 2005, Collins made it clear. He had no patience for Cowell or his brand of cruelty. "I've got no time for Simon Cowell," he said. "He's just cruel." One incident stuck with him. Cowell had told a woman who sang on boats, "I'd never go on a boat you were singing on, because it would sink." That, to Collins, wasn't criticism. It was humiliation. He turned down offers to appear on talent shows like American Idol. To him, they were lifeless formats where artistry didn't matter. Only ratings. He said, "Going on one of those shows would feel like banging my head against the wall." For Collins, the problem wasn't just Cowell. It was what he represented, a factory-style system that made stars by tearing people down. Then came Britpop, and it came with teeth. Noel Gallagher, frontman of Oasis, made Collins a personal target. In the early 90s, Gallagher declared war on what he called McDonald's music. Phil Collins and Sting, he said, were at the top of that list. "I want the severed head of Phil Collins in my fridge by the end of this decade." He told a documentary crew in 1994, "If I haven't, I'll be a failure." Gallagher later softened a bit, admitting he was being dramatic. But he never really let up. He kept calling Collins the Antichrist of music. Collins didn't hold back either. He said the Oasis brothers were just horrible guys, rude and not as talented as they think they are. Still, he admitted liking their music, even as he rolled his eyes at their behavior. It wasn't just personal, it was generation. Britpop wanted rebellion, and Collins was polished pop from the old guard. Kurt Cobain had his own take, and it was brutal. In a 1992 interview, the Nirvana frontman went on a rant that scorched everything Collins stood for. He mocked white male soul, cartoons and horns, and said he hated tie-dye shirts, unless, as he joked, they were dyed with the urine of Phil Collins and the blood of Jerry Garcia. Cobain didn't hate Collins as a man. He hated what he represented. Commercial pop that, in his view, was inauthentic and soulless. It wasn't just about taste, it was about values. To Cobain, Collins was the symbol of everything grunge was trying to burn down. And while the two never clashed face to face, Cobain's words stuck. He wanted to kill off an era, and Collins happened to be its face. But Collins's pain wasn't just public, it was personal. His marriages were stormy, and his divorces were even worse. He's been married 3 times. The first ended in 1980. The second, in 1996, cost him $17 million, around $34 million. But the most shocking split was in 2008. His divorce from Oriane Sev cost him $46,076 million. At the time, it was the largest celebrity divorce settlement in British history. Even McCartney's high-profile payout to Heather Mills was smaller. In total, Collins lost around $84 million in divorce settlements, almost a third of his entire fortune. The headlines weren't kind. They called him unlucky in love. But what came next made things worse. After reconciling briefly with Sive in the late 2010s, she suddenly dumped him over text and married another man in Las Vegas. The real twist, she refused to leave his $40 million Miami mansion. With her new husband, she reportedly hired armed guards, blocked security cameras, and changed the locks. Collins accused them of staging a takeover. Seve, in turn, demanded $20 million, saying Collins had promised her half the home's value. He denied it. The legal battle dragged on until 2022. A judge dismissed Seve's claims after she repeatedly violated court orders. But the damage was done. Collins had been publicly humiliated again. The woman he once trusted had threatened to release private information if he didn't pay. It wasn't just divorce anymore. It was war. And then there was Lily, Phil Collins' daughter. Now a star in her own right, has talked openly about their strained relationship. Her parents divorced when she was just 5. Collins wasn't around much, and the absence left scars. In her 2017 memoir, she wrote, "I forgive you for not always being there when I needed you." She spoke about the insecurity, the eating disorder, and the emotional void left by her father's silence. He may have still been alive, but most of the time it felt as if he were completely gone. It was raw, painful, but it was honest, and over time, they began to rebuild. Lily stood beside her father at his final Genesis concert. She called him her hero, but the road back was long and still carries the weight of what was lost. Behind all of this, behind the fame, the fortune, the grudges, and the gossip, was a man struggling to hold himself together. After his 3rd divorce, Collins fell apart. He began drinking early in the day. Wine at 11 a.m., vodka after that. It nearly killed him. He developed pancreatitis, suffered nerve damage, and eventually couldn't drum anymore. Phil Collins wasn't just a rock star. He became a household name on both the charts and the big screen. In 1988, he took a bold step into acting with the film Buster. He played Buster Edwards, a man who helped carry out the famous Great Train Robbery of 1963. The movie did well, especially in the U.S., pulling in over $540,000. But what really took off was the soundtrack. Collins's version of A Groovy Kind of Love became a massive hit. It reached #1 in both the UK and the US. Another song from the film, Two Hearts, also topped the US Billboard charts and even won a Golden Globe. Collins had pulled off something very rare. He was a hit actor and a hit musician all at once. Just over a decade later, he hit another high. In 1999, Collins worked with Disney on the animated film Tarzan. He wrote and performed You'll Be in My Heart, a soft, emotional ballad that became the heart of the movie. The song stayed at #1 on the adult contemporary chart for 19 weeks. In 2000, it won him an Oscar for Best Original Song. What made it even more impressive was that he didn't just record it in English. Collins sang the song himself in French, German, Italian, and Spanish. That helped the Tarzan soundtrack become a global hit, selling over 2.5 million copies in the U.S. alone. By now, he had pulled off something very few ever do, winning a Grammy, an Oscar, and a Golden Globe. But Collins didn't stop with leading roles or big awards. He loved surprising people. In 1985, he popped up in Miami Vice as a flashy con artist. Fans didn't expect to see a rock legend in a crime drama, but he nailed it. A few years later, he made a quick appearance in Spielberg's Hook as a police inspector. It was brief, but fun. And in 1993, he took a darker turn in And the Band Played On, a film about the AIDS crisis. He played the owner of a San Francisco bathhouse, a role that showed he wasn't afraid of serious or controversial subjects. These appearances proved that Collins wasn't just dabbling in acting. He was truly versatile, moving between comedy, drama, and everything in between. Even when he wasn't on camera, his music kept echoing through film and TV. In 2003, he wrote, "Look Through My Eyes and Welcome for Disney's Brother Bear." The soundtrack earned a Grammy nomination and sold over 500,000 copies in the U.S. He also showed up on The Simpsons, playing himself in one episode. And, of course, his iconic song In the Air Tonight became even more famous thanks to that unforgettable gorilla drumming commercial for Cadbury in 2007. His songs kept popping up in shows, ads, and movies, proof that his sound never really left the spotlight. But behind the scenes, his body was breaking down. He'd been drumming since age 5. Decades of leaning forward behind a drum kit eventually crushed his spinal cord. In 2007, during a Genesis tour, he dislocated a vertebra in his neck. That was the beginning of serious nerve damage. He couldn't even hold drumsticks properly anymore. At one point, he had to tape them to his hands just to play. By his late 60s, he had no choice but to stop drumming entirely. For someone whose identity was built around rhythm, that loss was devastating. Still, he didn't quit. He had major surgery in 2009 and again in 2016. But things didn't improve much. He developed drop foot, a condition that made walking difficult. He had to use a cane. In 2019, he even fell backwards off a chair during a concert. Yet, he kept going. He adapted. He began performing seated. Fans were stunned to see him like that. So different from the energetic man they remembered, but his voice was still there, and so was his passion. In 2020, Genesis reunited again. It had been 13 years since their last tour. This time, it was called The Last Domino, and it ran through Europe and North America. There were 47 shows from late 2021 to early 2022. His son, Nick, took over the drums while Phil focused on vocals. It was their final tour. Phil announced he was done. The pandemic caused delays, but they finished what they started. Seeing Collins on stage again, despite everything, was emotional. Fans knew they were witnessing the end of an era and a man who refused to give up. In 2016, he released his memoir, Not Dead Yet. The title said it all. In the book, he talked about everything: his health, his divorces, his regrets, and his battle with alcohol. He had been married 3 times. After his third wife left, he spiraled. He drank heavily. He felt like he had lost everything: his music, his family, and his purpose. The book didn't hide any of it. He was brutally honest about hitting rock bottom. But he also made it clear that he wasn't finished. That even though his body was failing, his spirit wasn't.